So now, I'm embarking on the second half of Season 1 of Attack on Titan, and we get a new plan introduced and some new characters and dimensions added to the show. And I've come to expect the unexpected on Attack on Titan, but I was still surprised that this new turn of events started with a courtroom drama. But it was well done, and I liked it as always. So let's get to it. The story starts off sort of eavesdropping on some rumblings that's going on with the citizens on the street. And this part of the story emphasizes like the impending food shortages that I've already talked about a couple of times at this point, and it shows that sort of the common person is thinking very much about these events that we're seeing take place. But this shortage of food and supplies and land, this is a very real concern, and it's a very powerful concern too. Because, of course, starvation makes people desperate, and desperate people will do desperate things. Like maybe start a revolution and topple the government. Which, if you're comfortable, if you're one of the people that's comfortable in your life in this world, that means changing the status quo. And of course, certain elements are very afraid of this. Like, for example, the military police. And they straight up mention that the fear of a civil war in the form of the people from the outer walls kind of revolting against those of the inner walls, well, that's really their biggest concern. And honestly, it kind of makes me think of sort of the dynamic between the Belters versus the inner planet people in the Expanse book series and TV show. So I always like those parallels that I can draw in my mind. But we do start to see a duality in opinion forming around Eren. Some see him as a curse, and I'm inferring this in the center of the power, like the military police represent power. The rich merchants in this world represent power. Those are the people I think see him as a curse. But then some see him as a savior, and I imagine that this is mostly like the refugees from the outer walls, the downtrodden, just in general the people that across all societies and cultures always seem to be the ones that bear the greatest part of the burden anytime there's a crisis. Very early on, we're introduced to the person who's going to serve as the judge at Eren's trial in the tribunal. And his name is Zackley. And we find out that he's the commander-in-chief of all three branches of the military. He's equally in charge of the Survey Corps, the military police, and the garrison. Now, I tend to default to mistrust of authority figures in stories, maybe in real life, I don't know. But especially in this story, I want to default to distrust of authority figures. But for some reason, I find myself liking this guy, this Zackley character, which is strange because I know next to nothing about him. But he just presents himself as like this no-nonsense type. And he seems above kind of any political aspirations or political intrigue. I don't seem to think he's playing any games. I really do feel like he will be impartial, and I feel like he is going to try to provide a fair trial. And I'm basing all of this pretty much just on what he looks like, because I haven't been told much about the character. But his face is mostly devoid of any emotion, and he's got this gray hair and gray beard that almost make him seem kind of grandfatherly. And even the way he walks, like he seems to carry himself like a man with a job to do. I genuinely believe him when he says that he's there to do what's best for humanity. I'm curious, did any of you folks feel this way when you first saw him on the screen? I want to know, am I demonstrating some kind of bias here that I'm not aware of? Please share what your first opinions of Zackley were. But I do think as this episode plays out, my feelings about Zackley, well, they prove to be more or less accurate, at least the way I interpret it. While Eren's being escorted to the court, this Survey Corps guy just gives him this big creepy sniff, just kind of like. And I think this shows just how much the Survey Corps attracts these odd folks. And we'll see a few more examples of just how weird some of them are as these two episodes play out. I guess it's kind of like the Bomb Squad or something, like you'd have to be just a little bit crazy to want to do it in the first place. And hey, no offense to any Bomb Squad members, but you know what I'm saying. I do gather pretty quickly that Hanji, this one member of the Corps that's helping escort Eren to the trial, well, I gather pretty quickly that she's definitely a bit eccentric. I'm really thinking that she's like Potato Girl, but maybe turned up a few notches, like she might be Sasha to the extreme, and I'm pretty quickly becoming intrigued with just how odd she'll turn out to be. And boy howdy, if she doesn't show herself to be quite different from the average soldier. So the stakes of this trial are made pretty clear. Eren will either be given to the military police or the Survey Corps. Pixis has withdrawn the garrison from consideration, which I kind of think is too bad because I really like the dynamic between Eren and Pixis that we saw. But one important thing to point out here is that freedom is not an option for Eren. It's this interesting and this very sad prospect because Eren seems to be driven by this desire to reclaim free will. His reason for wanting to go beyond the walls in the first place is sort of a pursuit of free will. In a prior episode, we even had Eren saying that people are born free, and that's why he wants to move beyond the walls, and that whole sort of analogy they build with livestock versus wolves kind of thing in the earlier episodes. It's really kind of dismal for Eren that freedom is not a prospect here. The military police, if they're given custody of Eren, their plan is to execute him. And this reveals everything, in my opinion, about the military police. They fear revolt, they fear other people more than they fear the Titans. And their primary concern is simply to maintain the status quo. They are comfortable, and most likely a little too comfortable, probably complacent. But the Survey Corps, they seem like a lesser of two evils in this trial. And perhaps that's by design because they're angling to achieve their own less than clear goals, so maybe they want to present something more palatable to the judge than what they're really up to. I don't know, that's just kind of speculation on what their motivation might be here. But they plan to use Eren as a tool, sort of as an instrument, and not really as a person. They don't really talk about him like he's a soldier, but more like he's a weapon. So at the very least, the way that the arguments laid out for the judge, freedom simply isn't an option for Eren. And during this trial, we also get our real introduction to this religious sect. They're called the Wallists. I think they've been briefly mentioned before, but this is really the first time I felt them entering into the story. And generally in fantasy epics, and I give this quasi-medieval European setting and this structure of the story in Attack on Titan, given all that, I compare Attack on Titan to epic fantasy, but usually in epic fantasy, religious sects are bad news. Some examples would be like the Sparrows from Game of Thrones, the White Cloaks from The Wheel of Time, or the Obligators from Mistborn. So I'm immediately lumping the Wallists into the bad guy category. But if I turn out to be wrong, it won't be the first time, and definitely this show does deliver the unexpected often enough, but right now my bias, my default is that the Wallists, well, they're bad news. As part of the trial, the Survey Corps lays out an ambitious plan to retake Shigansina. And I hadn't thought about it before, but with the Trost Gate sealed, there really isn't a direct route. So the Corps is going to have to use a different gate and then potentially fight their way across this large territory to get to Shigansina. So this certainly opens up a lot of story possibilities before they get to Shigansina. But on second watching, having thought about it just a little bit more, I start to wonder if this is really Erwin's plan, Erwin being the commander of the Survey Corps, or if it's just what he's telling the judge. Because even though I think the judge isn't playing any secret games, I think Erwin definitely has some kind of a major hidden agenda or a secret plan here that he's not sharing with everybody. I also think when it's revealed, I'm probably going to like it. At least that's what I expect. But as far as the judge's stated objective to do what's best for humanity, well, I really do think retaking territory is what's best for humanity. It could relieve the strain on resources that they're expecting, and it might even allow the population to rebound a little bit. If they have a little more room, a little more resources, they can actually get their numbers back and regain that 20% of the population that they've lost so far. Now, during the trial, Mikasa is asked if Titan Eren tried to kill her. And this is kind of an example of someone only wanting part of the truth, and she's not going to have any of it. She doesn't lie, she tells the truth, but she also answers beyond the question that was asked. Because, yes, she tells the truth that he did try to kill her that one time, but she also mentions the other couple of times where his actions saved her. And I'm proud of Mikasa for finding a way to handle this in this moment without compromising her own values in one direction or the other. But we find out the military police have actually researched Mikasa's background, and they found out some stuff about her that I didn't know they could find out, to be honest. I don't even know what kind of records were kept, but they did suggest more or less that nothing strengthens a friendship like stabbing a bunch of kidnappers together when you're 9 years old. But we all know that, right? But while he's chained to the pole in the center of the courtroom, we see Eren's defiance spark just a little bit, because Eren is nothing if not defiant in the face of certain defeat. But he actually calls out the military police for staying as far as possible from the Titans. And in this moment, I think Eren is genuinely just speaking from his heart here, but it accomplishes more than that. Like, it does sort of work to remind the judge and the crowd of this paradox, or this irony, if you will, of the cowardice among these supposed best troops in the land, the military police. They're so good, yet they stay so far from where they could do some real good work. It also sort of implies this fear of the Titans. And I do think this implication that the military police are afraid of Titans, well, I think this turns the trial away from the military police and toward the Survey Corps ultimately. But of course, Levi puts an exclamation point on it by handing out what I think was this absolutely brutal beating of Eren. I mean, it's hard to watch. Not just hard for me to watch, but even the people in the courtroom are struggling with it, and they have to turn their heads while this whole thing is going on. Really, really vicious beating to a guy who's defenseless here. But this beating, to me at least, it demonstrates three things. First, it shows that unlike the military police, Levi does not fear Eren. Also, it shows something about control. It shows that Eren can actually control himself. He's not like the Incredible Hulk, who every time he gets angry turns into a monster. Also, he's not like a werewolf who's at the mercy of a full moon. Eren seems to be able to take this beating and maintain his self-control and maintain his human form. So it informs everyone a little bit about Eren's control of himself. But it also demonstrates that Levi, and then by extension the Survey Corps, that they can handle or control Eren as well. And this gives the judge, I think, a measure of confidence that the Survey Corps is the best place for this potential monster. If the military police can't control him, and Levi kind of points this out, he might kill all of them when they try to kill him, and then you might have like this Godzilla-style rampage in the middle of the city or something. And we're also going to find out a little bit later on that the Survey Corps do in fact have experience with Titans as prisoners. And at the end of the episode, away from the eyes and the ears of the tribunal, Commander Erwin thanks Eren for taking this beating. And Levi comes to a sort of understanding with Eren as well, which I think calls into question, to at least a degree, like the sincerity of the spectacle that was carried out in the court. Like, even though Eren probably would have appreciated a heads up, I think he's not experienced enough to have pulled it off as well as he did if he was in on the ploy. So I think it was kind of important that he not know what was going on there. Episode 15 starts off with this sort of braggadocious character named Oluo. And he seems foppish, and he talks about himself so much that he actually bites his tongue while he's yammering on and his horse stumbles. And this is kind of funny and kind of satisfying when it happens, but I think that this Oluo is offered up as a juxtaposition to Levi. Like, he's sort of a pretend hero, or he just puts on the facade of a hero. And later we see some of the stats, like they have statistics that get shared with a few of the Survey Corps members. And we see that Oluo is the only one with more kills than he has assists. And I think this gives the implication that maybe he's selfish rather than a team player. Maybe he could spell bad news on down the road, like I'm definitely going to have one eye on this guy at all times. But he also seems like he is more concerned with personal glory than with the greater goal at hand. And I guess as an analogy, I would say if he were a basketball player, he's probably going to be a ball hog. And then with Levi, we get to see the difference between the legend and the man. And Levi here, clearly very different than Oluo. He actually follows orders, and he does seem to be committed to the greater objectives of the Survey Corps. And he plays his part as a hero. We also get a hint at Levi's background. We learn that he was actually a criminal before he joined the Survey Corps. And this absolutely pulls me into wanting to know what happened in his life to cause such a major change. Like, what kind of tragedy or conflict caused him to hate Titans so much that he went and joined the Survey Corps. And this might also explain a little disdain for the military police. I know that there is an OVA that's sort of centered around Levi, and maybe it answers some of these questions, but I haven't seen that yet. But I also sort of speculate about how Levi's skills as a thug, how maybe they helped him become the hero that he now seems to be. And it absolutely makes me think about possible parallels with Kelsier from Mistborn. a book series that I know at least a few of you are familiar with because I recently got a comment asking about breeze and manipulation when I was talking about Pixis in a previous video. We also get another hint that maybe this Commander Erwin is holding his cards close to his vest, because he says that it's important to show Eren's value soon to keep the military police off his tail, but Mike, I don't know if it's pronounced Mike, in the sub it sounds like they're saying Mike, but he's the sniff guy, I think. But he doesn't believe that Erwin's motivation is really what he states it is. And I think that the truth is withheld from us here. And it's probably going to drop on me like a ton of bricks when I'm not expecting it. We find out that new grads are going to be joining the Survey Corps before they set off on this expedition, and this is exciting to me because this likely means Eren is going to get a reunion. He's going to be reunited with some familiar faces. I feel pretty certain that Mikasa and Armin will join him, but I also wonder who else is going to reappear. I'm certainly hoping that Sasha, the potato girl, shows back up because I've been intrigued with her since she ate that boiled potato, but also maybe Connie. Like, I'm starting to think about Connie a little bit. Maybe Jean, like a lot of character development seems to be happening with Jean, so they might show up too. I guess I'll just have to wait and see, but those are all exciting prospects from my point of view. We see that Hanji is investigating and experimenting with the Titan prisoners. You know, in the previous video I speculated what in the heck are you going to do with Titan prisoners? Well, apparently these aren't the first Titan prisoners. But I do think showing her interacting with these Titans fully exposes the degree of crazy with Hanji here. Like, she almost has a Tiger King vibe with these Titans. She's like the Attack on Titan Joe Exotic. I guess I can call her the Titan Queen instead of the Tiger King here. Like, she nearly gets chomped a couple of times and she just laughs it off, laughs about it like it's funny. This is a lady who truly is capable of unpredictable and unexpected things, I would say. She also appears to develop like a strange sort of affection for her prisoners. She tortures them, but then she feels bad about it while she's doing it. This is just like very complex and interesting. The way they handle this turn of events with Hanji is how they seem to handle everything. Everything seems very complex and interesting. But Hanji tells this story about a cannibalistic tribe of humans that caught people and cut them up and cooked them and ate them, and then eventually they were caught and executed. But, you know, the Titans, they obviously don't understand this. At least I don't think they're capable of understanding this. So she's telling this story for the benefit of the observers. And when I say that, both the observers in the show, the other soldiers standing around her, but also for us, the viewers, the people observing through the television. But I'm really intrigued by pre-Titan history of humanity in this world. Like, I really want to know more about what was this world like before the Titans showed up. But I know this story must also serve some other kind of narrative purpose. Like, I wonder if it's some kind of allegory. But one thing it does with certainty is it definitely demonstrates that human cruelty to humans is much more gruesome than the cruelty perpetrated by the Titans. The humans would cut people up into steaks and stew, and then the tough parts of their body would be chopped up for mincemeat. As she's telling this story in detail, soldiers are turning around and losing their lunch. They're vomiting over in the corner because they're disgusted by it. And the Titans, they just, for the most part, swallow people whole. I mean, I prefer not to be eaten at all, but I think being eaten by Titans sounds more humane than being eaten by these cannibals. Call me crazy, that's just where I am on this. But after this, it's like a ceremony where Hanji names these prisoners, these Titan prisoners. And once characters are given names, they immediately become much more significant in a story. And I think that happens here. She names them Sawney and Bean. And even like the name Bean, Sawney I don't have much feeling about. But Bean is kind of like a cute little adorable name to give this big giant Titan. And once they're named, we learn that they also kind of have simple personalities. Like, one is a little bit more extroverted, the other's a little bit more introverted, and I think this show is starting to give us just a little bit of insight into Hanji's attachment to the Titans. We also learn from Hanji and from her experiments and her experience more about the physics and physiology of the Titans. Now, I expected some of these questions to be answered, but I also expected suspension of disbelief to require me not to ask certain other questions. But this show tackles them head on. And I have to love a show that has this much respect for the intelligence of the viewers. We learn that the Titans are more or less solar powered. They get their energy from the sun. And this answers why they don't have digestive tracts. I like this answer. I just thought, they were alchemical creations or something and they weren't going to answer this question. But But giving me the answer not only makes it feel a little more real to me, but it also sets some limits on the Titan's powers. And that's kind of a refrain you'll hear me talk about on anything that I review, is I like for powers to have limits. I don't want things to be too OP'd or too easy to resolve conflict. So by saying that they're powered by the sun, there's an immediate limit here that they can't really be active at night. So this kind of implies to me that maybe for the Survey Corps or for humanity as a whole, that covering a lot of ground at night might be a sound or a safe thing to do in order to avoid Titans. So that's something that I think could be useful knowledge in the future. We also find out that their bodies are much, much lighter than expected. Now, I totally didn't expect the show to address this, but it did, which is wonderful. It helps pave the way for an explanation about how Eren can summon a Titan body out of what seems to be thin air, and it also maintains some laws of physics, and it doesn't just rely on the explanation being sort of a soft magic explanation. By soft magic, I mean it just happens because it happens, don't ask questions. They're actually going to try to explain it to a degree, more like hard magic or sci-fi. And by discussing that their bodies are lighter than expected, it addresses this physical principle that kaiju party poopers have been dropping for as long as I can remember. And that's a principle, and I'm sort of simplifying it here, and I might not get it all right, but I'm trying to get the idea across. But it's a principle that as size increases, strength increases by a power of 2, like strength is squared, while the mass increases by a power of 3, or the mass is cubed. So with this physical principle, there's a tipping point where an organism gets too big to move, and it's not realistic, it wouldn't be able to function. And this is kind of the reason why whales live in water instead of on the land, because the buoyancy offsets this to a degree. But in a wonderful move, Attack on Titan confronts this principle directly, when most stories tend to just avoid it altogether. So good on you, Attack on Titan. And just as Hanji is about to share her secret hypotheses about the Titans, well, a soldier interrupts to reveal that the Titan prisoners have been killed. So this immediately introduces a mystery into the story, the mystery of who killed the Titans. And I think the prime suspects are probably the military police, the Wallist religious sect, or other survey members. At least for me, those are my 3 prime suspects. But more important than who killed the Titans is why did they kill the Titans? Because I think the motive will reveal who it was that did the act. So we also know there were at least 2 assassins because 2 of them were spotted leaving with mobility gear. So by definition, this is a conspiracy. Now, what if the motivation or the motive is trying to prevent the gaining of some sort of knowledge? Or in other words, maybe preserving the status quo. And that's why these Titans were killed. That makes the military police pretty suspect here. Yeah, this is maybe going to turn into a massive game of Among Us. I don't know. But you also add in this implied fear of Titans that the military police have. That makes them seem really, really likely candidates to be responsible for this. But what about sort of a philosophical opposition to studying the Titans? I could see the Wallists feeling this way. I could see the Wallists thinking that the Titans are abominations and that they shouldn't even be allowed to live within the walls under any circumstance. Also, I think one of the info cards tells us that the Wallists think that the walls actually are God. The walls are God. So how would they feel about the possibility of a maneuver that's going to further damage the walls by sealing more gates? Or how would they even feel about prospect of humanity being able to live without the walls altogether if we conquered the Titans here? So I have to believe they would be opposed to that. And then, the cynic in me is coming out probably for the first time in this video. But the cynic says, what if this is just a way to motivate or manipulate the Survey Corps? What if this is a way to put them into action, or maybe to try to unify them around a cause of some sort? What if this is an attempt to open their eyes to what the, quote, real conflict is? This would make the Survey Corps itself become suspicious. Now, Levi just washes his hands of it, and he says that it's the concern of the military police now. So this makes me think either Levi does or doesn't know what's going on. That really narrows it down, doesn't it? But he doesn't care, or at least he doesn't suspect the military police as the culprits, because if you thought they were the culprits, would you turn the investigation over to them? Honestly, Levi's enough of a wild card, I don't quite know what's going on in his mind in this moment. But he certainly doesn't want to devote any energy to figuring it out. And then Erwin, the commander. As Eren is looking at what's left, the skeletal remains of these Titans, Erwin kind of stands over Eren's shoulder and he asks him, "Who do you think the real enemy is?" So that makes me really want to theorize on who Erwin thinks the real enemy is. Does Erwin think the real enemy are the humans and not the Titans? Did maybe Erwin orchestrate this to make this point, to illustrate this point to Eren? I don't know. Is Erwin trying to orchestrate a revolt? Is Erwin actually wanting to overturn the existing power structure and give more freedom to the people in the outer walls? Is Erwin responsible for this greater conspiracy that I'm suspicious of? Again, I honestly don't know, but I do suspect Erwin wants some kind of sea change in humanity's status quo. And I guess the only way I'll find out is to watch more episodes, so I'm gonna get on with that. I'll talk to you again soon. Until then, goodbye.